And before I begin, I'd like to dedicate this shiur. It's my father's yahrzeit. His name was Netanel Ben Yoel, and his neshama should have an aliyah, which means his soul should go up. Some people know me as Minna Lederberger, and then I don't know from this crew, but there were some people who knew me as Mindel Pua Bas Leah, because that's my Hebrew name. And when people were davening for me all over the world, that was the name that they davened for, Mindel Pua Bas Leah, and people would say, oh, I didn't know that was you, you know? It was like one of those moments when you try and make a connection, like, who's Minna Lederberger and who's Minna? Oh, they're the same person. Okay, I know who she is. Anyways, in December of 2012, my daughter Dalia was graduating from Beth Rivka Ladies College. And she was scheduled to go at the end of December on a gap year to Israel, as many of the girls do. And we decided as a family that we would have a little holiday. It was like just enough before Christmas to still get those good prices on accommodation. And so I thought I'll have a look around, see where we'll go. And we decided to go to the northern New South Wales coast because I heard that the beaches there are really, really beautiful. And I found a resort called the Salt Resort. Apparently they have them all over the place, and it looked really nice, and you know the accommodation looked promising. And so I said, okay, great, we're gonna have a little family holiday. I have a son, his name is Ellie, and my husband Sam. The four of us will go, we'll have a holiday. Dalia will go off to Israel, and life will continue on, as I thought. Not everything always goes to plan. Anyways, I remember going to shul that Shabbos. I daven in Beit HaRa'eh, Mizrahi, and I said goodbye to some of my girlfriends. I said, we're going off on Sunday morning. We're going for 10 days. I'll ring you when we get back. Now, the first 2 weeks of our holiday, I really can't give you information from a personal view because I was really not here. I was in a coma. So where did I garnish all this information from was my daughter Dalia started a blog so that she could keep family and friends all around the world kind of up to date instead of always having people calling, what's going on, what's going on. You know how it is when, God forbid, there's a crisis. People really want to know, and it's hard for the people involved to constantly be on the phone answering those questions. So thank God for technology. She had her blog. Everybody knew where to go and get the blog, and she kept everybody up to date. Interestingly enough, when I read her blog, I was amazed at how clinical she was. She was really able to tell the story dispassionately and just giving over the information, because that's what people wanted, just give us the information. Okay, so I try and give the story complete. Things happened before we left, which may or may not have been a precursor to it, but because I'm telling a story, I feel I have to include everything. So my husband had come down with a pretty nasty eye infection, and his eye was nearly completely closed, and he was on antibiotics, and should we have not gone? You don't know. Who knows if you're supposed to say, go, don't go. But we went. He felt okay, and we decided to leave. So I'm going to punctuate a few dates just to give you a timeline of when things started and where I was when it all ended. So it was December 9th of 2012 when we decided to leave. It was a Sunday. We got on the plane in Melbourne to go to the Gold Coast. I don't remember that much about the flight. My eardrum burst and I was in a lot of pain. That's what my daughter told me. But once we landed and walking through the airport, I remember getting into the sunshine and we get the rental car, and my husband told me, I even remember him walking around, how you go with a piece of paper to make sure that they don't charge you for any of the scratches or nicks that were there beforehand. I remember we went to the chemist to buy some more antibiotics. We went to Safeway to buy disposables. So these are things that I do remember. I remember, we had packed enough tea lights. It was the first night of Hanukkah, so I remember lighting the first night of Hanukkah candles, and not much else. Apparently, my ear was bothering me. I had a bloody discharge, and my husband took me to the emergency room, They had a look at the ear, they gave me some ear drops, and they sent me home. Fine. The next day, my husband said I slept the whole day. On the Tuesday, I decided to make use of the spa facilities at the resort and have a massage because I was just feeling so unwell. Everything was hurting me. And the problem was nothing was helping. And the masseuse said to me, "You've got something really wrong, and a massage is not going to, fix it." And so they called my daughter. She came to pick me up. I couldn't sign the credit card slip. I could barely stand up. They wanted to call for an ambulance, and my husband came instead, and he took me off to the hospital. Tweed Heads was the name of the hospital. So unfortunately, I started to crash very, very quickly, and so they put me in ICU very, very quickly. The next day, the medical team diagnosed me with something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's an autoimmune disease where your antibodies are attacking the nerves, the lining of your nerves. That's what they thought it was. And so they started me on a 5-day course treatment. In addition to that, I had the ear infection, but I also had pneumonia. Unfortunately, the antibiotics weren't working, so they had misdiagnosed, and they had to figure out what it was. Well, on Thursday, they diagnosed me with something called HLH, and you can all Google it when you get home. HLH stands for hemophagocytic lymphocytosis. It's a very, very rare, different, but very, very rare autoimmune disease. And in HLH, your immune system is not only fighting infection, it's fighting you. So, you're not in a good space. I also had something called a streptococcal A infection, which is a very nasty bacteria. And when you have that kind of infection, your organs don't get enough oxygenated blood, and so they start to shut down, and you die. Dr. Sia was the hematologist that my family was dealing with in Tweed Heads. And he told my family that in 2012, he treated 4 other patients with HLH, and that only one had survived. The one that survived had malaria, and the other patients who had HLH had cancer. He also told my family that in order to confirm a diagnosis of HLH, my blood work would have to be sent to Melbourne, to the Royal Children's Hospital, because HLH is really an autoimmune disease that affects children. It doesn't usually affect adults. And so in order to get a firm diagnosis, they would have to send the blood here, and that would take 5 days. And I was dying right there and then, and they really didn't have 5 days to wait. And I have to tell you that I've always been a very firm believer in what is termed hashgacha pratit, which is divine providence. And you have to paint a picture for yourself. This is a very small, rinky-dink country hospital, Tweed Heads, and this doctor saw 4 cases of HLH that year. And for me, that only says one thing. There's a saying in Hebrew, it says that God sends the cure before he sends the plague. And so this was what I acknowledged, that God sent those 4 cases of HLH in 2012 so that Dr. Sia would know how to treat me and save my life. So the course of treatment for HLH is steroids, but it's also chemotherapy. And I also, of course, had to have antibiotics to treat the streptococcal A. So at that point, my immune system had to be shut down completely. So the HLH was more of a threat to my life than the streptococcal A infection. As a result of the streptococcal A, the toxic shock, the HLH, my circulation was very, very poor. And they decided to put me on life support so that I wouldn't have to fight. I could be helped along in terms of my breathing and my oxygenation. So my husband and my children went home that night to the unit, and he sent my daughter down to the milk bar to get some drinks for dinner. And Dolly tells me that as soon as she got there, her phone went off, and my husband called and said, the hospital just called, Mommy's dying, we have to go back. And so they had to get back in the car and go back to the hospital. And so, of course, en route, my husband was talking to his sister, and she said she was going to fly up, and talking to a cousin of mine, and, you know, he was going to fly up. And, you know, they were expecting the very, very worst. My condition was very fragile, and I had deteriorated, but thankfully they were able to stabilize me. On that Shabbos, my condition stabilized once again a little bit more, but one of the things that they learned in ICU is that everything's a spectrum of stability. You know, sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. Doesn't all stay the same. So while some things were improving, other things were deteriorating. My circulation was very, very poor. I wasn't receiving much blood to my small arteries and large arteries in my feet, and they could not detect a pulse. They were able to detect one on Friday, but on Shabbos they couldn't detect it. On the other hand, thank God, the circulation to my hands came back. On Shabbos, the doctor spoke to the family and suggested that perhaps the use of a blood-thinning agent would help open and widen the arteries so that the blood could flow and that there would be circulation. The problem was that with blood-thinning agents, you also risk a brain bleed. And so they kind of had to weigh up, like, what should we do? So they decided they'll try and take me down for a brain scan and see what's going on there. So they did that. The brain scan came back clear, except for the sinus and ear infection, and so the risk of using the blood-thinning agent was much lower. Problem also was that I had a very low white cell count. It was down to like 15,000, where normal is 80,000. So they had to wait until my white cell count would be bumped up to between 50 and 80 if they were going to do any blood thinning at all. So I was still in critical condition and in quite grave danger. The doctor, speaking to my family, said, and these were his words, that he was sure I was going to pass away on Thursday and that it was a miracle that I actually survived. So that's his words. He's making those sounds about miracles. HLH has an extremely high mortality rate. So that Shabbos was a little strange for my family because those of us who go on holidays usually take the whole kitchen sink with us, all the food, everything that you need for Shabbos. And so there they were sitting in the flat, you know, with my cousin and, you know, another friend and, you know, my sister-in-law eating food that I had cooked, you know, and I wasn't there. So my husband left his mobile phone on Shabbos just in case there was a reason, and it rang about lunchtime. And so, you know, there was all this intake of breath. Oh my gosh, the phone's ringing. What kind of news could they possibly give? And my husband went and picked up the phone and spoke to Dr. O'Loughlin, who was the head of ICU. And he said, I'm calling to tell you that the brain scan was normal. And it was just the first bit of good news that I could offer you, that I couldn't wait for you to come to the hospital. So I'm just, you know, I had to call you to tell you that the brain scan was clear, which was lovely. So I was still in an induced coma. Things were starting to improve a little bit. I was breathing on my own, but I had the support of the machine. The blood thinning agents did not appear to have any effect, and they were still unable to detect a pulse in my feet. I would continue to be fed this blood thinning agent, but if there was no change, then they would have to make some hard decisions. The doctor said to my family, I would prefer to you have a Minna with no feet than no Minna at all. And that was kind of how he left it. On Wednesday, December 19th, while I was still in a coma, I was transported from Tweed Hospital to the Wesley Hospital, which is a private hospital in Brisbane, because they were better equipped to deal with my medical condition. Ironically, while Tweed Heads was such a small hospital, but they knew what they were dealing with, in Wesley, they didn't have a clue. And my daughter told me they had to gown up, put masks, put aprons, put gloves, because they really didn't have a clue if I was contagious or anything. So while it was a bigger hospital, they weren't as informed. Thank God everything went well. I transported okay in an ambulance. The family followed in the car. I was still critical and I was still in a coma. I was responding to the chemotherapy and the steroid treatment for HLH, and I feel very blessed that the doctor knew what to do, because I wouldn't be here if he didn't. My platelets were still very low. I was continuing to receive more and more blood transfusion platelets. This carried on well into when I got back to Melbourne. It was a constant. They did an angiogram on the feet, still didn't show any pulse. I think they felt, that things were not looking so good. On the Thursday night, they decided they were going to start to wean me off of some of the sedation so that I would start to come out of the coma on my own. I wasn't coming out as quickly as they wanted me to, but it wasn't unusual. So sometimes it takes a little bit more time to bring somebody out. I finally started to wake up on Shabbos afternoon, and when my family came to see me, I was awake and I had been intubated, so the tubes were gone. And as my daughter likes to say, "Mom, you were surrounded by 10 cans of Diet Coke." I said, "What are you talking about? I don't drink Diet Coke." Well, apparently when they took the tube out, the nurse says, "What do you want to drink?" And I said, "Diet Coke." And that's all I started. I want Diet Coke, I want Diet Coke. I don't drink Diet Coke, I only drink water. So, okay. But I was awake. That was great. On the 23rd of December, I was finally moved out of ICU, and I was transferred to an oncology ward. And I was awake, and I was conscious, and I was talking, and I was eating, and there was nothing abnormal. Thank God it only took one round of chemotherapy to knock out the HLH, and that was now under control. So now the focus was to rebuild my immune system and to return everything else to normal, the platelets and everything else. No change in the feet, and at this point, the doctors said, they like to speak in doctor speak. So the doctor speak is, there will be a demarcation, which means there will be a line between healthy and unhealthy, and that's when we'll know what's going on. So I remember very clearly the day the vascular surgeon came into my room to tell me what he believed was that I would need this amputation. And he comes in and he says, "Well, I'm sorry, Mrs. Lederberger, but it looks like you're going to have your feet amputated." And I said, "What are you talking about? You can't do that." And he looked at me like maybe she didn't hear, maybe she's not really in. And I said, "You can't do that. I have to dance at my daughter's wedding." And he said, "Oh, was she engaged?" And I said, "No, she's not engaged, but she will get engaged, and I will need to dance at her wedding." And he said, "Oh, don't worry, you'll dance at her wedding." Like, that was the one thing that I felt was the most important thing. If I can't dance at my daughter's wedding, then nothing's worth it. So we'll see. She's not engaged yet. I'll let you know. It was going to be a very, very long recovery. I was very weak. I couldn't move my hands. I couldn't move my arms. Part of it was because I was fighting infection for 2 weeks, and even though you're in a coma, your body is fighting whatever's happening. Muscle weakness is also very common from patients who are in an ICU situation, and regaining strength in my muscles was going to only happen through willpower and physiotherapy and time. I was so deconditioned from my stay in ICU to the extent when they rolled me into the ward, how they settle you in and said, "Here's the call button. If you need anything, call the nurse." Well, I couldn't press that button. That's how bad it was. I could not press that button. And so they brought a little bell. They thought maybe I could shake it, but I couldn't lift it to shake it. So it kind of gives you an idea of where I was at. I was completely dependent. I couldn't lift my arms. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't brush my teeth. A physiotherapist would come every day to physically take my arms and lift them up and down because I didn't have the strength to do it myself. I remember one day she came with a picture. I couldn't hold a pencil to color in. She wanted me to sign my name. I couldn't do that either. I think from this whole experience, the most confronting for me, and I think a lot of women would feel the same way, was the loss of dignity that you experience when you can't do anything for yourself. So I was unable to toilet, and I was unable to shower. And you don't have a choice whether you have male staff or female staff coming in to help you with those things. By the time I got to the ward, my legs were already gangrenous and wouldn't support me. And so I couldn't get up and just go to the toilet. So if I wanted to go to the toilet, it would take 2 nurses to come into the room to bring a patient hoist, and they would strap me into this hoist, and then they would mechanically lift me out of bed, and then they would swing it around and into the bathroom. And I have to say that it was a horrible, horrible experience, and I hope nobody ever, ever has to go through anything like that. And if you ever see elderly people, or if you have, elderly friends or parents or, anything like that, have a little, thought about how difficult it is for them to have to deal with the loss of dignity of not being able to toilet and shower themselves. So I couldn't feed myself, so my husband and my daughter took turns cutting up my food and feeding me, and my son Ellie would take hand lotion and massage cream into my arms and my hands because they were so dry. And although I was no longer in ICU, I wasn't back in Melbourne and I wasn't home. So we kind of fell into a little bit of a routine. I mean, this was supposed to be a 10-day holiday, and it ended up being a 5-week thing. So my husband really had a business to go back to, but thankfully he had an employee who was helping out and looking after things. So here we are in Brisbane, Shabbos is coming. How do you keep Shabbos in a hospital setting? Well, it's a little bit difficult. So we had been talking about it, and when they came from shul, Rabbi Jaffe there is the rabbi in Brisbane, in case anybody ever goes to Brisbane. He is the most wonderful, wonderful man. His wife is an Eishes Chayil. She's an amazing, amazing woman. And so they came back from shul, and we started singing Shalom Aleichem and Eishes Chayil, because of these things you do. And a male nurse walks in, and he says, oh, the patients are really enjoying the songs and the singing. So, that was good, that was good. And then he told us that he recognized the Hebrew words because he was a nurse in Tel Aviv. And he said, you don't have to worry about a thing. I know all about Shabbos, and I will take care of everything. So there you go. Hashem organizes everything, so you don't have to worry about a thing. On the Sunday, we learned that the HLH had caused nerve damage, and that was why I was having this difficulty with movement in my limbs. And every day, a little bit more was returning, but it was going to take quite a while. So I worked with the physiotherapist every day, and I did exercises while she was away. She left me some little hand weights so that I could work on that. And, one day one of the doctors walked in, he says, you can do physio all day, all day, but it's not going to help you because you need the passage of time. You need the passage of time. It was suggested that perhaps hyperbaric oxygen medical treatment could be useful. Has anybody heard of that before, hyperbaric? So hyperbaric is, the patient is in a treatment chamber, and they put a hood on you and they filter in 100% oxygen, and you're put in a chamber that's higher than sea level pressure. And it's usually used on patients who perhaps are diabetic and they have wounds that won't quite heal properly. So they thought maybe this, we're still battling for the feet, maybe this would help. And so usually a patient goes in for like a 12-week period, maybe an hour every day or every other day. Well, I had like 3 hours every single day. And I couldn't sit in a wheelchair because I wasn't strong enough, so it would take my whole bed down. And it's 3 hours, and they said, you know what, maybe you should bring a book to read. It's boring in this chamber. But I couldn't lift a book. So they said, take a magazine, but I couldn't lift a magazine. So Dahlia was tearing pages out of the magazine because I was still so weak. I could, maybe hold 1 page of a magazine before I had to put it down. So I spent every morning in that chamber to improve the circulation. And I did have like a tingling sensation on the soles of my feet, but it could have been just something like phantom sensation. So Rabbi Jaffe and his family provided every Shabbos for us, from soup to dessert, from fish to challah, home-baked, fresh-baked challah, just everything you could possibly need. And they would take the kids out for a walk on the beach. Rabbi Jaffe said to my family, there's a really, really good beach here that's very secluded, And the family said, yeah, which one? And he said, Salt Beach. And the kids say, we're staying there. We know the beach is secluded. Friends, it was summer, friends who were coming up to surfers were bringing Klein meals, because I only cooked, I mean, even though I always cook a lot for an army, I didn't cook for 5 weeks, we were only going to be away for 10 days, so people were schlepping up Klein meals for us, and you know, so that we could have something to eat. At this point, I wanted to get home. We needed to get home. How can we spend all our time in Brisbane? My husband has a business, the kids have their lives, but the air ambulance company was closed till the 2nd of January, so I couldn't go anywhere anyways. On Monday, the 7th of January, we were told that they were going to try and, you know, get an air ambulance available for me, but it was a very, very expensive endeavor. It was a $20,000 expensive endeavor. And we really weren't quite sure how we were going to be able to fund it. So we do have ambulance membership, we have travel insurance, and of course we have private health insurance. So we were hoping one of those entities would pick up the bill. So of course the health insurance company said, well, you're getting very good health care in Brisbane, we don't see any reason for you need to go back to Melbourne. And the travel insurance company said, well, this is a legislative thing and this needs to be done by the government, we don't have anything to do with it. And the ambulance people said, well, you're not an emergency situation, so, you know, what do you need to go for? So thankfully, with the help of, you know, members of parliament, Michael Danby, friends who have friends in high places, you know, we managed to finally get, you know, the go-ahead as a result, probably, of this doctor who I had the conversation about with my daughter and engagement and dancing at weddings. He wrote this letter to the executive board of the ambulance, air ambulance, saying that it's integral, it's crucial for her mental, for her, you know, stability, for her, you know, for everything else, all those things that need to be, you know, taken care of. She needs to get back to Melbourne. And so they had a big meeting and they said, fine, we will foot the bill, the government, the Victorian government will fit the bill and you can go home. But you're not an emergency case. So if anything else comes up, they're gonna go before you're gonna go up. So I was going, but I just didn't know when. So we decided, my husband and I decided we were going to send my daughter. She obviously missed her trip to Israel because she couldn't leave while I was dying. So we thought we'll send the kids back to Melbourne and my husband will follow the following day. So they boarded a flight, they get to Melbourne Airport. Dalia's friend Yardena Shachna and Sippy Blecher came, pick her and Ellie up from the airport. And they get into the house and the next thing you know, they're assaulted by this terrible, terrible smell. And apparently the fridge and the laundry, all the stuff in the meat, the freezer, everything, kind of like died. And they had to kind of deal with that too, clean it out. Of course, Dalia forgot to ask Sam for money, so they had no money. There was no food in the house. So they ended up contacting a friend of mine, Naomi Blach, and she took them out to Noga for dinner and gave her some money until Sam got home. So that Wednesday, Sam took an 11 o'clock plane from Brisbane to Melbourne. And what took him for 2 hours took me 6. So I ended up going on a tiny little aircraft. I was still lying flat on my back on a stretcher. It has a pilot and it has a nurse. And you know, they do your vitals all the way through, then they land to get refuel. So I finally got to the Alfred Hospital about 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, and I finally got to the ward about midnight. That's just the way it goes, but I was home. I was in Melbourne, and I was really, really happy. So the doctors at the Alfred suggested that bilateral, which means both legs, amputation was probably the best way to go. They said, you know, 3 weeks in hospital, 12 weeks in rehab, you'll be on prosthetics, it'll be fine. You know, everybody likes to tell you everything's gonna be fine, everything's gonna be fine. I continued physiotherapy at the Alfred nearly on a daily basis, and you have to understand when you've been so deconditioned and so unwell, everything is difficult. So, for instance, I could not turn. You know how when you're in bed and you're trying to find a comfortable way first on one, I was still being taught how to turn, how to move up and down the bed, but you know, it was it was something that was really hard, and it was going to take me a very long time to master. Gradually, I was able to start lifting 500-gram weights and then 1 kilo weights. My right side took a little bit longer than my left side, all of the nerve damage that came about because of the HLH. But I could feed myself, and I could brush my teeth, and I could hold a book, and I could use the nurse bell, and I could use the remote for the TV. So this was a vast improvement to where I was a number of weeks ago. It was at the Alfred Hospital, which is a public hospital, where the nursing staff is not so available to you, that they started to push me to say, look, you're going to have to learn how to shower yourself because we can't come in and shower you all the time. And while it was difficult for me, it was probably a very good thing, because if you're a patient and not pushed to do things for yourself, then you're never going to rehabilitate. So, little gestures were very helpful. If any of you have ever been hospitalized and requested kosher meals, it's gray. It looks gray, it comes gray. The nurses took one look at it, and they had like this shock horror look on their faces, and they ran out and came back and said, here's a little fridge. Maybe your family wants to bring you food. So that was really very nice of them to do. At the Alfred, a man across the corridor from me had been amputated on both legs, and I would watch him like a monkey swing from his bed to his chair to a shower commode, and I thought, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to do this. And the nurses said, well, if you'd like, you can meet him and talk to him, and maybe he can reassure you. And I did meet him, and I did speak to him, and I guess maybe I was starting to realize that my reality was going to just be a different reality. As a family, we're very, very blessed. We have a small family here in Australia, and we have and belong to a number of very warm communities. We just happen to have our feet in a lot of different places. So my husband is a yeshiva graduate. I mean, he's 60, so he graduated a long time ago, but he's, and he still davens in yeshiva. And my son is in year 11 right now at yeshiva. My daughter and I have moved over to Mizrahi for different reasons, but my husband's family has always had a connection to Adas and always had a connection to the Kol Beis HaTalmud. And it was with the help of all of these different communities who davened so hard, who said Tehillim Psalms, who gave tzedakah, charity, who did good deeds in my name so that I would be able to live. And we are very, very grateful to everyone. Through the Make Them a Meal plan, I don't know if any of you have ever heard this, but this is an amazing thing. I've seen it for women who have new babies, and you have this plan, and people put, let's say what night they want to make breakfast or dinner or lunch and what it is, and then you just get meals. And I just had, meals coming to the house. It was booked up until Pesach. So it was a very wonderful, warm, thing for my family. We actually started giving food away because there was just too much food in the house. So on Thursday, the 24th of January, I actually moved over to Gabrina Hospital because the surgeon that we wanted, his name is Michael Bruce. I don't know if any of you know him. Nobody should know him. He's an excellent surgeon, and he was the one that I wanted to do my surgery. So I moved over there. I remember the physiotherapist coming to see me, and he brought some resistant bands to tie around the head of my bed so that I could start working on my arms. And he took IV bottles, well, they're bags, IV bottles, and he put little handles on them so I could kind of use them as, dumbbells to kind and, use them to build up my upper body strength, because when you don't have legs, you rely a lot on your shoulders and your arms to move you around from place to place. Before my surgery, I met with a man named Dr. Michael Chu. He is the director of rehabilitation at Caulfield Hospital. And he walked us through, from the surgery, through rehab, through prosthetics, trying to, give me an idea of what life was going to be like following surgery. And he was very confident that I would have no problem gaining my independence. So the surgery was scheduled for the following week, you know, as long as all the other subsidiary doctors, the endocrinologist, the hematologist, you know, all the other doctors would agree. So at that time, my main focus was increase mobility and strength and build up body mass, because I'd lost about 15 kilograms when I was over in Brisbane. So, of course, Dr. Bruce said, you know, you must eat and binge on anything and everything that you can possibly eat. And so when everybody heard the green light, Sweet Crumble was still around, and everybody came with something from Sweet Crumble. I was so sick of Sweet Crumble. It was like up to here. It was just so sweet. It was just really hard. I was told that I would be home Pesach, and that even though I might not have my prosthetics at that point, that, you know, I would be in a wheelchair and you know, things would be okay. So the anniversary of my amputation is Australia Day. So Australia Day 2013, I had both of my feet amputated. So the amputation is not just the feet, it's a little bit higher, it's just below the calf is where the amputation was. I was in Cabrini for less than a week, believe it or not. And from day 3, post-op, I was down the corridors in my wheelchair, up and down, up and down. And then one day, the nurse came and said, oh, we have a bed for you at Caulfield. So pack up, you're going. You know, it's like, how am I gonna get, you know, my husband's at work. I had a girlfriend, she came, she helped, everything was okay. I was so happy to be out of a hospital setting. You know, when you're in hospital, you're still in pajamas, you know, but when you're in rehab, they put you into day clothes. So, you know, each part was like another journey. I was moving, and I was moving. So that was a good thing. I remember one of my girlfriends came and she brought me a gift and it spelled out home. And she said, you just focus on that. You need to get home, focus on that, you need to get home. Anybody who knows Caulfield Hospital knows that you don't go there for the aesthetics. It's pretty much a dump. I have a friend of mine who came to visit me with her 12-year-old daughter, and their family are known to be huge charity givers, and they do multitudes of good deeds all over the place. And she relates this conversation she had with her daughter, and her daughter said, Ma, nobody should have to recuperate in some place like this. Can we please donate money there? It's just such a horrible place. But for me, Caulfield had a lot of redeeming qualities. I was closer to home. And I mean, I had people come and visit me at the Alfred on Shabbos. I used to work at the Alfred, so it's a good 40-minute walk, and I knew people were coming to see me there, but Caulfield was so much closer, so I knew I'd have people coming to see me there as well. They also happened to have the best rehabilitation physiotherapists and the top prosthetics department in Victoria. At Caulfield, I was in a room with 5 other women. There are no private rooms at Caulfield, and one of the women there, her name was Mitzi Woodhouse. And she's quite an amazing woman. She's a bilateral like me. And she's really the one that became my mentor. And she was the one that gave me tips on, you know, what I should focus on. And she told me how I had to preserve my energy and find ways to make my life a little bit easier. She spoke to Sam, and she spoke to Dahlia, and spoke to Ellie. Don't wait for her to ask. Go and ask her what she needs, you know, that I shouldn't have to ask them, you know, please do this or please do that. They should, you know, want to offer. They don't offer. I still talk to Mitzi and one of the other ladies. We kind of had our little tight group there, and we catch each other up on our, you know, progress. We formed a clique there, and we were very protective of each other. And so for me, the most important thing was that there were no men in the room. So, you know, every week that I was there, I had the kids buy chocolate or something, and I'd roll down to the nurse's station and give them a box of chocolate, asking them, please keep this a men-free room, because not all rooms are men-free. They do mix the sexes in these rooms. And I think they realized that modesty was a huge issue for me, and they complied. I mean, I was there for 3 weeks, but they were very good about it. So you kind of have a run of the day. You do physiotherapy in the morning, you do physiotherapy in the afternoon, you have visitors whenever they come, whenever they go. I remember in my bedside table, I had a little bottle of like green tea that I would like to spray after my shower, but I couldn't press that button. I just couldn't. I tried every day I tried to press that button. And then one day I did. And I'd press that button, and I called Dahlia at 8 o'clock in the morning, and she's like, what? It's like, Dahlia, I pressed the bottle. she wasn't as excited as I was, but that was fine because I knew that I was able to do something and that I could feel myself getting closer to home. I actually donated that sign to the physiotherapy department at Caulfield so that they could push other people to get home. It's when you're in a rehabilitation atmosphere, you're so dependent on the people around you that you don't want to leave. And that's the most important thing. The most important thing is to want to get home, not to want to stay there. So I had visitors coming all the time, and I would often have to move them to the day room. And my roommates really didn't understand why so many people came to visit me, because they didn't have that concept of community and how lucky we are that we do belong to a community. Very, very important. I have to mention that Liechtenstein's delivered lunch to the Alfred every single day. It's part of their mitzvah drive. Free to any patient in any hospital. They will deliver it. Caulfield, they didn't deliver, but my daughter would pick it up every day. And so much nicer than having a hot meal for lunch. All you wanted was a sandwich, and they do it. And it's a lovely, lovely thing that Liechtenstein's does. Finally, in the third week of February, I spoke to Dr. Chu because Purim was coming, and I didn't want to be in rehab for Purim. And he said, well, you need to make a compelling case. So for me, compelling case means tell him the story of Purim. So I'm on the bed, and he's got all these doctors with him, and I'm telling him the story of Purim and Haman and Esther, and they're all looking at me like, she's really gone off the twist or something. And finally, Dr. Chu said, is it perhaps because you're a little bit frightened of going home and you want to do a trial? And I said, yes, that's exactly what it is. And he goes, okay, gives me this big wink, and he says, okay, good. Then we'll let you go home for one night. And I was so ecstatic, I couldn't even believe it. So, patients go to bed at 7 o'clock on the ward, and I was, awake. It was Motzei Shabbos, so that year Purim was Motzei Shabbos Sunday. My husband was coming to pick me up. And we had to organize, I couldn't just go home because I was in a wheelchair. So what do I do if I have to go to the toilet? I can't go to the toilet from a wheelchair. So we had to organize a commode, and I had to have all my medication, and they had to organize a ramp because there are steps into my house. So, all these things were put in place by the occupational therapist. And Sam picks me up at 9 o'clock on Motzei Shabbos, and I am over the moon. I had my cousin in the house, ready to lay in Megillah with all my friends around me. I was just, you couldn't wipe that smile off my face. I was so happy. And it also meant that it was one step closer to getting home. So on Sunday Purim, I spent it with my family, and my neighbor, Wendy Meltzer, she made Sudat Purim, and she brought it over to the house. And even though I knew that I was going back to rehab that night, I knew, most importantly, that I wasn't going to spend another Shabbos in rehab. So I was scheduled to come home that Friday. So that I could deal with. So Erev Shabbos, March 1st, Sam came, picked me up. I gave all my goodies to my roommates, whatever I didn't need, and I got home. And I was so happy. I was just so, so happy. So thank God our house is one level, so we don't have a double story, and we have quite wide passages and doorways. And so the only alteration that we needed to make to the house was to build a permanent ramp. Even though I haven't used my wheelchair since I got my legs, you never know when you might need to, and you have to have a ramp for that purpose. And we have a glass shower, and the shower door wasn't quite wide enough to fit the shower commode, so we had to make a wider shower. But that's all the alterations that we needed to make. So I was still in a wheelchair. I hadn't received my legs yet, but the occupational therapist would come once a week and would set me goals, like maybe you can try and do this from a wheelchair or that from a wheelchair, and I would go to physio 3 times a week and work on stretches and exercises, things that I needed to do to continue to build up my strength. So of course the first thing I started doing was exactly what you ladies did tonight, bake challahs, because that's really, really important to me. I happen to have a mixer that will hold the weight of 2.3 kilos of flour. And my son Ellie loves to work with me in the kitchen, so he pulled it out and I gave him direction and we made challahs. It was the first thing I made as soon as I got home. So on the 9th of March, 2013, did I send you the video? I did? Did you want to, do you want to send it around? Okay, maybe you can forward around. So that was the first time I stood up. So that was exactly 3 months from when I took ill, when I got my prosthetic legs. And when you see it, it's what it was. It was hard. It was huge and it was hard. So I would go to physio and I'd put my legs on and I would walk through parallel bars, and that's what I did 3 times a week. But the next hurdle was Pesach. How am I going to make Pesach in a wheelchair? Well, God looks after me because I have a Pesach kitchen, and I have 2 able-bodied children, and I have amazing friends, and it was probably my easiest Pesach ever. I didn't worry about a thing. I just knew that everything was going to be great. And we had a month of food left after Pesach, so it was just amazing. I brought my legs home in the second week of May, 2013. So since that time, I wear my legs from when I wake up in the morning till when I go to sleep at night. So my OT suggested a couple things to make my life a little bit easier. And this is a good tip for any of you who have, elderly friends or grandparents or anything like that. One of them was a kitchen trolley. So I happen to have a big bench and, a very wide kitchen, so I can take things from the pantry, put it on the trolley, and then roll it to where I need to go. So it saves you the effort of walking back and forth and back and forth. And the other thing was a chair. It's like a perching chair that I can pull up to the kitchen sink when I peel all my vegetables or cut up all my fruit, because I don't do anything in small batches. I only do big batches and I freeze. And so I fatigue quite a lot when I'm standing on my legs, so this way I don't have to do it. And I do the ironing on the chair. So I sit on the chair and I iron. For me, it was amazing to be able to stand up and do things that I couldn't do from a chair. Okay, so now, as we say, we get down to the tachlis. Like, what am I here for? What am I here to tell you? I mean, it's a very nice story. I survived a terrible, terrible thing. But for me, anyways, I think that there's a lot more going on. So my daughter always sends me pictures of people who are climbing Mount Everest or doing, crazy things like that. I've never had any interest in climbing a mountain. And I've never had any interest in running a marathon. I'm not looking to do all those things. I think it's very important to set goals, and I think we all set goals at some point in our lives, and I've also set goals. So, of course, my number 1 goal is to be able to dance at my children's weddings. That's very, very important to me. But my other goal, and I think this is quite appropriate because it's Yom Yerushalayim tomorrow, I really would like to walk the old streets of Jerusalem. And anybody who's been in the old city knows that they're cobblestones and knows that they're very slippery and that there are lots of hills and that it will be very, very challenging. But I will do it. I plan to do it. People say, oh, you're so strong. You're just so strong. And I don't know where they get that. I'm not really sure what that means. But I'll tell you a little story. So 7 years ago, my mother's sister passed away in New York. My mother and her siblings are all Holocaust survivors. And when her children were cleaning out the home in the basement, they found actually a packet of letters from my grandparents to their children who were in England during the Shoah, the Holocaust. And nobody knew these letters existed except for this sister. And so one of my cousins from Israel, who lives in Israel, had the letters. They were written in German. My mother's tongue was German. And they had them translated, and she put it into a book and called it Letters from My Grandparents. And all of us cousins, have a book of letters from my grandparents. And in these letters, my grandparents, who were running from the Nazis constantly from one place to the next. And through it all, my grandfather is writing to his children, telling them to be strong, that God is with them, and God will look after them, and that they will soon be together. And when I read these letters, I am astounded by the amount. You often hear the words emuna and bitachon, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the difference between those words. The Rambam, Maimonides, defines emuna as knowledge that Hashem created and continues to run all of creation. So what that means, emuna means that God is running things 24/7, 365 days. If there's a war somewhere, God made that happen. If there's a drought somewhere, if there's an earthquake somewhere, He is the one that is running the world. There is no other power but Him. That's what emuna means. And you can have emuna. You can believe that God is doing all these things without bitachon, because bitachon is something completely different. Bitachon means that you trust that God is out there looking after you, that you trust that He will make everything right, and that you trust that He has your best interests at heart, and that you trust that God loves you the way a father or a mother loves a child, and that He wouldn't do anything to hurt you. That's the difference between, just in case you didn't know. I thought it would be nice to point that out. You know, I have a wedding picture of my parents on my lounge room wall. It's a sepia one, and they're beaming. My father was very, very handsome. He was like Clark Gable, only more polished and better looking. And my mother was a stunner, absolute stunner. And they're beaming out of this wedding picture, and it was 1946 they got married, so just after the war. And they've both lost their parents, their home, their family. They're in a new country. Language is not their first. And they're beaming. How are they smiling out of this picture? And yet they managed, through the ashes of the Holocaust, to take their family, to go to New York and raise my brothers and myself with this constant belief that if you're going to turn to anyone to help you with something, the one you turn to is God. Because He is the one that's going to get you over the hump. He's the one that's going to help you. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a psychologist, and I told her I've been telling my story around and how people say, "You're so strong, you're so strong." And she said to me, "Minna, those of us who know you know that this is not the first," in Hebrew they say nisayon, which means challenge. It's not the first challenge that God has put in front of you. And she's right, it's not. I got married when I was 28. My husband was 30. I was very ill the year before we got married. They thought I had pancreatic cancer. And it wasn't pancreatic cancer, but I was very ill for a whole year. Challenge number one. Well, challenge number one was not getting married till I was 28. Challenge number two was being so ill. Challenge number three was not falling pregnant for a very, very long time and going through IVF and then finally conceiving naturally my two beautiful children. So challenge number four has now been, challenge number four was probably the back surgery I had when my son was 13 months old, and maybe this is 5, I lose count. But I think that all these challenges has been a preparation for this big one. And so at this point I've asked God to stop challenging me. You know, you don't need to take me back piece by piece. I'm fine this way, just leave me, for now. But I think it's God's way of drawing me closer to Him, because the truth of the matter is that through each challenge I have drawn closer to God. And for me, it's not enough to believe that whatever happens comes to me from God, but I also have to believe that God, who challenges me with these things, challenges me with love and with care, and He helps me to overcome these things. Well, no one else is going to help me overcome it. You don't see many people pushing amputees to go to gym, So, you've got to get that love and get that push from somewhere, and I think I get it from God. So, I did mention Glixer. I've always believed that everything I experience comes from God. And for me, it's even about the mundane. So the mundane is ladies, put your hand in your handbag and grab your car keys. And do you come up with them, or do you come up with the house keys, your phone, the phone book, the lip gloss? You come up with everything else, but not those keys. So even something as mundane as that is from God. Or you're driving down Carlisle Street, you have no bread in the house, you've got to run into Glick's, and it's pouring rain. And just as you get to Glick's, some car pulls out, and you get to pull right up in front. Who do you think did that for you? You didn't do it, so somebody did that for you. And so if you ever see me driving, because I do drive, down the street or in the Kohl's car park looking for a car space, and I find one, I start talking. And what I'm saying is, thank you, God. Thank you, God, for making my life that much easier, for allowing me to have this car park space. I mean, you didn't do that. Someone out there is pulling strings for you. You just have to tune in, you know? You have to make an effort to detect Hashem. So what I'm trying to tell you is that it's possible that even at this late date in your life to tune into Him. You have to try. It's like a radio when you're trying to find a station and not get all that, fuzzy stuff. So for me, it's waking up in the morning and you see nature. We all take nature for granted. The sun rises, the sun sets. It's always done that. But nature is miracle because God makes the sun rise and the sun set. He's the one in charge. If He wants it to stand still, and He's done it before, He could do it again. So you have to look at the world with different eyes. And you don't have to go through a traumatic experience to look at the world with different eyes. So, okay, for those of you who know yeshiva, and whoever davened in yeshiva, when I was in ICU and I was coming out of my coma, I actually had something going on in my head. I was hearing a phrase over and over and over again. And actually, Rivka Yurkovich told me, that what I heard was her father. So the words going through my head, and I didn't tell anybody this for a long time because I thought they were going to send me off to the Looney Tune. In the final prayer of Yom Kippur, we're in Ne'ilah, and we say 7 times, Hashem Hu HaElokim, 7 times, over and over and over again. And that was what was going on in my head when I was coming out of my coma. And so the reason I'm sitting here as calm and as a cool cucumber as I am today is because from that very point onwards, I've always felt God with me. He's with me all the time. He's helping me get through it. You don't have to go through ICU to do that. You can channel this, without going through trauma. I trust that Hashem loves me, and I trust that He provides for me. I know that I'm only here because of everybody davening for me, my family, my friends, people all over the place. And I'm grateful that I've had a second chance at life. And this journey has taught me a few things. So I believe that God controls everything, but just because He controls everything doesn't mean that you can just sit back and relax. I mean, we have free choice and we have to do things. And when I work as a volunteer education guide at the Jewish Museum, and when I want to give over one snippet of information that these non-Jewish kids will leave the museum with, I tell them one thing. The Torah is the blueprint on how to live our lives. You don't need to know anything else. As long as you know that these are the things that you need to do. You need to pray. You need to give charity. You need to do good deeds. You need to help your fellow man. You're good as gold. Just keep traveling on that line and you'll be fine. Sometimes we live our lives a little bit on cruise control. We're so hectic. Lives are so, we've got so much technology and things, to help us, and yet our days are so much longer and so much more complicated. And sometimes we need to step back a little bit. And this is only for me. I'm not talking for anybody else. But sometimes I think that I got a little tap on the shoulder from God, and God kind of said to me, you know what, Minna, you really could give me so much more. You can talk to people and tell them, that you're so happy with life and things are so great. So maybe I'll, throw you a little slider there, and, you'll find another way to do things. And I have. I'm doing everything that I need to do. So I don't clean my house. I have a cleaning lady. But I do all the shopping, schlepping the bags from Kohl's. Sometimes the kids are home, sometimes they're not, and I have to schlep it up a couple of steps. I go to the gym twice a week, and I work on the rower, and I do some weight stuff, and all this while I'm balancing on these two legs. And, you know, when I first started these talks, I had to make my first Pesach, and then a Sukkot, and then, you know, I made 100 Oznei Haman, Hamantashen for Purim, and Pesach was a piece of cake, and, you know,